This morning, conservatives conquered in Texas this year. But after 3 special sessions, did Democrats get anything? A powerful player behind the scenes at the legislature, State Rep Yvonne Davis, in a rare interview with us. Have you gotten your property tax appraisal yet? The legislature is lowering your bill, but what will it take to get real property tax reform? One of our questions for State Senator Paul Bettencourt. Is the Texas power grid ready for the winter? Electric providers are concerned. This morning, a voice you haven't heard. Todd Staples, president of the Texas Oil and Gas Association. And Texas's new Secretary of State, the man Governor Greg Abbott picked to oversee our elections, worked for Donald Trump to contest the last one. We'll ask the Roundtable what to expect from him now.
Inside Texas Politics with Jason Whiteley starts now.
Good Sunday morning to our viewers across the state. 2 rare interviews this morning. Before we get to them, though, let's start the week with some of the political headlines you might have missed here in Texas. Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick made good on his promise to pay someone if they found voter fraud. This wasn't in Texas, though. Instead, Patrick paid $25,000 to a poll worker in Pennsylvania. Why did he get that check there on your screen? The poll worker caught a Republican cheating last year, a conservative who voted twice. Patrick paid the Pennsylvania man. It's an interesting piece in the Dallas Morning News. Republicans are making another effort to recruit voters in South Texas. The Republican National Committee opened what it calls a Hispanic Engagement Center in San Antonio the other day. The RNC already has offices in Laredo and McAllen. Republicans are focusing on these areas of Texas after they did better than expected there in the 2018 and 2020 elections. And Congressman Lloyd Doggett is running for re-election, but he's doing so in another district. Doggett is running for one of the 2 new congressional seats that Texas just got. This new one is a solid Democratic seat in Austin. Doggett's existing seat stretches down to San Antonio now. There's also chatter that Wendy Davis and maybe even State Rep Gina Hinojosa might also be considering that seat. But now to a veteran of Texas politics. This is a state representative who does not seek out publicity. In fact, she has never been on our program before. Still, she remains influential behind the scenes. State Rep Yvonne Davis is a Dallas County Democrat, and in this rare interview here, she is reflective about how the state politics are now changing. Representative Davis, welcome to our program here. We're glad to have you. I want to ask you about the entire legislative year. Republicans really got almost everything in the legislature they wanted. Did Democrats have anything to brag about at all?
No, in fact, we leave the Capitol feeling really disappointed and disgusted with regard to the level of politics that influence what's going on in the Capitol versus policy. So we didn't get anything. In fact, this is a redistricting cycle. What we saw this 3rd session with redistricting, it was the same thing that we went through with SB1. People just want to ignore the rights of minorities and their right to vote, their right for fair representation. So it's just a continuation of what can we do to the people to harm them. The most vulnerable communities are the ones that are being attacked.
Representative, Republicans, as we all know now, locked in some huge gains for themselves with the congressional districts that were passed. All this, obviously, despite the state being as diverse as it's ever been. You call those Republican maps mean-spirited, disingenuous, and racist. My question is, based on what was passed, does Texas have any shot of going blue in the next decade?
What we did this year has just been horrible with regard to recognizing that Texas has changed a lot. There is much more diversity there. 95% of the growth was with minority population, African Americans, Hispanics, and Asians. And to not represent that with the maps that we drew just is unconscionable.
Representative, Democrats are going into the midterms, obviously, with no wins, as you mentioned. Going forward, does that help motivate the base or does that hurt morale in the base?
I think it's a combination. I'm motivated based on what happened in California as an indication that citizens are waking up saying enough is enough. I think the greater problem is the fact that most people have lost confidence in this process altogether. and fewer people are participating in electoral politics. I think that's the greater loss in concern. But I think we can use this as a way to motivate voters to come out. I think when we went to DC on both occasions, I think citizens realized that was pretty obviously a drastic kind of act, but a necessary act. So I'm thinking that yes, I can see us winning some races.
And what races are those? Everyone's talking about who might run for governor, whether it's Beto O'Rourke or someone else. What races do you think might go in the Democrats' favor?
I think that their candidates still are considering running for governor, as well as there's been some discussions about lieutenant governor. I'm not really sure that I know who it is, when it is, what it is. I just know that the process, it always swings back. And this pendulum of conservative, take all you can, why you can, when you can, will grow old for the citizens of Texas, and they will want their government back in the middle. And I'm confident of voters having that thought in their mind at this point. These the cult, the corona, the mask, every school district suing the governor. I mean, it's broken. Everything's broken, and so I think people are going to be looking for ways to bring in reasonable folks to try to address some of those kind of concerns.
Representative, I don't know if I detect exhaustion or frustration or anger in your voice, but you sound like you're fed up.
I'm fed up, but fired up. I think that one of the challenges for folks like myself is, because we know it can be better, is to get fired up and try to make it better. Fed up with the stupid stuff and energized enough to try to get people motivated to recognize it's not getting better, it's deteriorating, and it requires them to get engaged. So fed up, but fired up.
I realize these interviews are rare, so we appreciate your time, but Representative, interesting insight. Thank you so much for the time.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it very much.
Heading into the winter, there is a big push to make sure the heat and the lights stay on. So the legislature formally created a committee to do just that. It's called the Texas Energy Reliability Council. But the Texas Tribune did some digging and discovered that oil and gas groups had a lot of influence in who serves on this council. So why is that so important? Let's go to Ross Ramsey, the co-founder and executive editor of the Tribune. He is in Austin as always. Good morning to you, Ross.
Good morning, Jason. How are you?
Doing well up here. Aaron Douglas's story really raises questions about whose interest these oil and gas groups will be looking out for, whether it's the public interest or their own.
You know, it's a straight up conflict of interest. The Texas Railroad Commission, which regulates the oil and gas industry, has long been a captive regulatory agency. It's more attuned to the needs of the industry than it is to anything else. It's the only industry that it regulates, and that's where all of those politicians get their money. And it shows up in policy decisions like who's going to serve on these boards, and raises questions about who they're going to represent once they're there.
And the focus of a lot of scrutiny in recent years as well. I want to ask about early voting. It ends for the constitutional amendments election this coming Friday. There are a couple of hot button amendments in there. Do you expect all of these to pass since this is such a low turnout election?
I kind of do. I mean, I hate to predict the future, but you know, these are, I mean, they're more like warm button issues. They're important to some people, but they're not important to most Texans. It's going to be a very low turnout election that tends to favor the people who are ardently for or ardently against something. And I wouldn't be surprised if all 8 of these things pass.
All right, Ross, thanks. Back to you in a moment. Coming up, the legislature is lowering your property taxes, your homestead exemption actually, but what will it take to get real property tax reform? State Senator Paul Betancourt suggested that might happen next session. And oil and gas is facing a lot of criticism this year after the power outages in February. In just a moment, a voice you haven't heard. Todd Staples, the president of the Texas Oil and Gas Association. Texas is on a list that state leaders don't like to talk about. We are in the top 10 now for the highest property taxes in the nation, number 7 actually. But in the final hours of the third special session, state lawmakers rammed through a bill that might change that slightly. This is a bill that State Senator Paul Betancourt put together. He's a Republican who represents the west side of Houston and Harris County. Senator Betancourt, welcome back to our program. We appreciate you being here. Let me ask you about the property taxes, the bill that you just got passed in the final hours of the third session there. I just got my appraisal, and the tax rates in Dallas have gone down slightly, but my appraisal is up like it is everywhere across the state. If this passes as a constitutional amendment next March, am I going to see an actual reduction, or is that going to get swallowed up in the increasing property values?
Well, actually, by any definition, when you increase an exemption like we did in SB1 from 25,000 to 40,000, that's a cut because you didn't have it before. And that's a permanent $176 per year cut for as long as you own the home. And that means well over $5,000 for a lifetime because that follows you anywhere you go effectively. So it's a very powerful tool. And we're just seeing the beginnings of as values go up, rates come down. You've seen that on school systems, and now SB2 is finally kicking in that would also do it for the cities and the counties.
Real property tax reform, so many people say, is when cities and counties and the state don't give away the farm when they're trying to recruit businesses to Texas. You're laughing. You know all about this.
I know exactly where you're headed with this.
Would you support eliminating that option? Because doesn't Texas already have a business friendly structure already set up?
Well, what's happened is that was a program called 313, 312s that actually expired at the end of this year because there was so much consternation about it. And when you look at it, the problem is that we had some serious abuses, especially with some of these solar powered facilities that had one and only one employee when you need actually 25, okay, to be able to qualify. And so if we're not going to have responsible use of economic development funds, we're not going to have a program. So really, this program is going to expire. And then in the next legislative session, we have to take up what that means and how to do it right if we're going to do it, because doing it wrong doesn't make anybody happy, except the people that get money, that get a windfall and produce one job. And that's not what the program's about.
Do you think that will be renewed next legislative session, the regular session? And does Texas really need these big tax breaks, I guess, to attract companies here?
Well, the problem is you're competing against 49 other states that do. So you have to look at when you unilaterally disarm, what's that going to do? Now, Texas is a huge magnet for job creation. We've seen it with HP and Tesla and a gazillion other companies moving to Texas. Well, that's because of our structure is favorable to business development, especially the fact that we don't have a corporate income tax. So if you're going to do economic development, you have to do it right. But there's no way that existing 313 program is going to be renewed. It's toast, it's gone. Whether it's a 626, I'm making a joke, something else, it will come up, but it has to be done right because the old program had ended up with a bad reputation for some bad deals that people shouldn't have done.
Is there any appetite at all in Austin for a fourth special session? Anything else that conservatives want to get done? It seems like it was a really conservative year.
Well, it was. I mean, there's a couple election bills, Senator Hughes and mine. One was a audit bill. That was mine, Senator Hughes on penalties. But look, when you see messages out from Speaker Phelan, Lieutenant Governor Patrick, have a great holiday, Thanksgiving, Merry Christmas. The governor sends out his stuff. I think the odds are looking pretty low at this point in time. And after participating in a 10-month legislative cycle, I'm ready to live long and prosper myself. So as a regular person back with, regular folks back in the district.
Understand. Senator Betancourt, we always appreciate your time.
I'm just happy to be there. I'm shocked we didn't get a redistricting question, but what's the next step? It's going into the courts and you'll have plenty of time to cover it. So thanks.
Indeed it is. Now to a concerning question. Is the Texas power grid ready for this winter? Electric providers are concerned, and mainly for one reason. Natural gas fuels half of the power plants in Texas, but natural gas companies are not required to weatherize them. They can voluntarily opt out, declaring they are not critical infrastructure. Well, that got state lawmakers upset recently. So what does the gas industry say about it? Todd Staples is a former state leader who is now president of the Texas Oil and Gas Association, and he's one of our guests on this week's episode of our Y'all Political Podcast. How many natural gas properties have signed up as critical infrastructure right now? Any idea?
Yeah, so there's been over a 2,000% increase since February of 2021. When we looked at the numbers from an ERCOT workshop, there were about 60 natural gas supply chain systems that were signed up. And now there was about 1,300 at the last count. And that was around the August timeframe, maybe September.
And so how many total are there?
Well, I mean, there's 250,000 oil and gas wells. There are over 7,400 water disposal wells. There are a multitude of gas compression stations all along the line. There are 35 gas storage facilities in Texas that I mentioned earlier contain over 544 billion cubic feet of working natural gas. So there's too many to go on to be able to manage during an emergency and to make certain that it all works right. And so I think it's very important, though, that we don't overlook this factor is that the reason that there's a lot of concern about this is not really because people in the business are worried about too many opting out. They're worried about too many opting in, and then the TDUs cannot manage that load. And I think this is a very important point that has been lost in the conversation about this element, because the reason you have this registration is because somebody is going to lose their power, and they're trying to determine who is it that's going to lose their power in this industry.
Interesting conversation here. If your phone is handy, open its camera and scan the QR codes about to come on your screen here. It will take you directly to this episode. Y'all-itics is new content. It's fresh interviews with newsmakers every week across the state. Episodes drop on Tuesdays, and you can find them wherever you get your podcasts. Still to come on this program, Texas's new Secretary of State, the man Governor Greg Abbott picked to oversee our elections. He worked for Donald Trump to contest the last one. We'll ask the Roundtable what to expect from him now.
This is Inside Texas Politics with Jason Whiteley.
Time now for Reporters Roundtable to put the headlines in perspective. Ross Ramsey is back with us from Austin with the Texas Tribune. Bud Kennedy is here from the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, and Bernadine Steptoe, the political producer at WFAA in Dallas, and joins us each week for this segment. Ross, let's start with you and Governor Greg Abbott's pick for the new Secretary of State. He actually worked for Donald Trump briefly to contest the 2020 elections. What should we expect from him now as Secretary of State who oversees the elections?
Well, I think he's going to be under a lot of scrutiny because he worked for Donald Trump. You know, this has been a running thing with Republicans, whether they trust the elections and whether they trust the election law. The governor has put in place a guy who argued Trump's side in that Pennsylvania case briefly. And then, it's kind of a signal to everybody that he's on the Trump side in these arguments.
And Bud, he is a Fort Worth native and has quite a resume. He's not a newcomer to state politics by any means.
Yeah, he's a heavy-duty litigator. He's been around for a long time, mostly in healthcare. But, you could argue it the other way and say that he got inside the Trump case, took a look at it, saw that it was ridiculous, and gave it to Rudy Giuliani and got the heck out.
Bernadine, that's a good point. You're shaking your head on that. What's your takeaway from this?
I think that Abbott has in place someone who's going to make sure that all of these laws that were passed during these sessions are executed, that he is sending a signal to his base that he has someone overseeing the election. But I think that it speaks a lot for Abbott that he's going to make sure that he's in control of this election.
Bud, let's shift off to the legislature for a moment here, too. There's been some rumblings there might be a fourth special session. I think Austin's probably exhausted for having the lawmakers down there for so long. What are the governor's options on this when you have the lieutenant governor pressing Greg Abbott to go ahead and call something? What will the governor do, do you expect?
This is why we only have a short session, so that the legislature doesn't stay in Austin forever. This is why we only meet for 100 some odd days. But these special sessions, all these special sessions, a lot of these bills have just been do-overs, Jason. I've never seen so many do-overs. Do-over critical race theory, do-over leashing dogs, for gosh sakes. It's just been time after time. I think the governor can say, finally, we've really worked hard all year long. Let's give it a rest and come back in 2 years.
Ross, you're smiling. They're do-overs because the governor vetoed those two bills early on and wanted the legislature to pass them again. You had a column the other day at TexasTribune.com that you wrote that after Republicans approved the new maps, that don't look for Texas to turn blue anytime soon.
Yeah, I don't think, this is going to be a red year. I think it's a Republican state. There's a Democrat in the White House that usually plays against, that usually has a hard time in the midterms, for the party that's in the White House. And they've just drawn these redistricting maps that favor Republicans in the Senate and the House and the State Board of Education. I think Abbott's looking at that. The Texas legislature has been in session longer this year than Congress has. And I think he's got everything he wants. He's ready to, start looking at Christmas lists.
Bernadine, that's a good point. The state legislature in session longer this year than Congress. Unbelievable to think about. What are the chances you think for a fourth special session? Because no one's really saying that this is likely at all.
0. As Ross just said, the governor actually got everything that he wanted. And I don't think the Republicans are not ready to go into another session. They want to raise money. They want to campaign. So I think it's 0 chance that we're going to have a fourth session. All
right. Well, it has been a busy year politically as far as the legislature goes. Guys, we appreciate it. Thank you very much. And thank you for watching as well. We're back again next Sunday to take you inside Texas politics and hope to see you then. Take care.